Hello. The eye is one of your sensory organs, and your textbook talks about the mammalian eye. It's the only type of eye you need to learn about. So let's start off by thinking about the important layers that are inside the eye. You might remember bits and pieces from GCSE. But if we start off talking about the retina is the inner layer, and it's the layer that contains the light-sensitive cells. So by light-sensitive cells, we're talking about rod cells and cone cells, and later on we'll learn more about the differences in those two types of cells. But the retina is the layer that contains those cells that basically detect the light. Immediately around that, then we've got a layer which I need to make black. Here we go. So we've got a layer called the choroid, and as you can see, it's black. Now, the reason it's black is because black absorbs all different colours of light, and whenever light shines into your eye, so if light shone there, it might, if that black layer wasn't there, it might reflect off the back of the eye and then go off at all sorts of angles, and you'd have light rays bouncing around forever and ever and ever. That doesn't happen because once the light passes through the light sensitive cells, it hits the choroid, it's black absorbs the light, so that reflection doesn't happen. So if I get rid of the lights bouncing around there, the choroid layer, we said it's black, pigmented layer, it also contains blood vessels. And then on the outside, we've got another layer which is really a thick layer which keeps the whole eye together. It's connective tissue. Its job is to, as we say, to sort of to keep everything together. It's a tough connective tissue. Prevents any damage to the eye. And the muscles that move your eyes are attached to this, and this layer is called the sclera. Now, at the front, the sclera isn't a tough layer, it's a transparent layer. So the front of the sclera isn't called the sclera, it's called the cornea. So hopefully you remember that term from GCSE. So just to recap what we've said so far, on the inside of the eye, we've got three layers. The inner one is the retina that contains the rod and cone cells that are sensitive to light. Immediately behind that, we've got the choroid, which is a layer of pigmented cells. They're black in colour. It prevents the light being reflected around the inside of the eye, and it also contains blood vessels. And then finally, outside that, we've got a tough, opaque connective tissue. It covers the eye. It protects the eye against damage. As we said, muscles are attached there. At the front, the sclera becomes the cornea, which is transparent. It's actually quite thick, and it will help with it bends the light, it refracts the light, and we'll come to that later on. Now, the diagram I've drawn is quite messy. We said there were lots of blood for the one in your notes. And if we just look at the labels here, this top one here is pointing to the inner one, so that's the retina. This is pointing to the next layer, which is the black layer, so that's the choroid. And then we've got the sclera on the outside. What else do we have here? Well, you'll notice in the retina that we've got this region here, which is, it looks a wee bit funny. That is called the fovea, and that is the most accurate part of your eye. That's where the most accurate image is made. And also this part here is coming from the choroid, and there's also lots of nerves. So these nerve cells will meet up at this region here. And so you just got this real conglomeration of nerve cells. There's no rod cells or cone cells there, so that is called the blind spot. if light falls on that spot, you won't actually see it because you don't have any light sensitive cells there. And those nerves then are coming from here, from up round here, and they're all converging there. And then so these neurons are going down here. This forms the optic nerve. And as you remember, a nerve isn't a cell, it's like a bundle of neurons. That's going to take the impulses to the brain. Now, what about the front of your eye? If we look, so looking at this diagram, if we were to put labels here, that's your upper eyelid. We've got the cornea. If I draw in yellow here, this is the cornea here, and it's a clear transparent layer. So this one here is pointing to the cornea. You've actually got a very, very fine transparent layer on top of the cornea. It's really, really thin, and that's called the conjunctiva. Now, I'm not sure if I'll be able to squeeze this in. And it's just a very fine membrane. It's transparent, it covers the cornea, and it's really just there to protect the cornea from damage. You might have heard of somebody having conjunctivitis, and that's where that membrane gets infected, and it might be itchy or it might be sore. And so it's just that very thin, transparent layer that protects the cornea. What else have we got? Yep. So we talked about the coloured bit of your eye. So if you were looking straight at somebody, remember it's that shape there with the pupil in the middle. On this diagram, it's these bits here because we've cut through. This is a cross section through someone's eye, so we've cut through, and so we're seeing those bits there. So those are parts of the iris, and as we said, the iris is made up of two different types of muscle. And we'll look at the two different types of muscle later. And it's coloured, so it absorbs light. And it changes the size of the pupil. So this is the pupil in here. So the pupil is basically that gap in the centre of the iris. The lens I sketch out. Whoops, didn't mean to do that colour. Someone's eye. Okay, it looks a bit weird. You'll be glad I'm not doing your eyebrows. Right. Going to give this person nice blue eyes. When you look into someone's eye, the black bit, I'm sure you remember, is the pupil. The bit I've coloured in blue is the coloured part of your eye, which is called the iris. Okay. The iris is made up of two types of muscles. And so the iris can change in size. So you might have the iris looking like that, or it might look like that. The iris is coloured, and it doesn't really matter what colour your iris is. The fact that it's coloured means it will absorb a lot of the light that's trying to enter your eye. Your retina needs to be protected. If it gets hit by too much light, the sensitive rod cells and cone cells could be damaged. And so the iris really is a safety mechanism. And if it's a very bright day, if there's a high light intensity, it will look like the diagram on the left. If it's dim light, well then the problem is that there's not very much light, and there might not be enough light to actually stimulate the light sensitive cells, and so the iris changes shape, and it means there's a bigger gap to allow more light into the inside of the eye. So that gap we're talking about is a hole which we call the pupil. So that's the pupil there. That's the pupil there. Pupil is not a black disc. It's simply a hole in the iris. And that's the hole that the light enters through to get into the inside of your eye.